in the future. More security and dignity at work. Town centres thriving. Streets safe. Borders controlled at last. Clean energy harnessed for national renewal. New homes, new towns, new hospitals, roads and schools. A new future for our children. That is what people will get. And mark my words, we will deliver it. People said we couldn't change the party, but we did. People said we wouldn't win across Britain, but we did. People say...
End of marriage. Starmer collapses after receiving divorce papers from wife Victoria. Something rattled Downing Street this morning, and it wasn't a Tory ambush or a tabloid scandal. This time, it came from Sir Keir Starmer's own side. A quiet deal he had proudly struck with the European Union has exploded into a headline-grabbing backlash, threatening to hike electricity bills and draw Britain back under Brussels' regulatory influence. The warning didn't come from a political rival or a partisan voice. It came from an expert, now sounding the alarm on what could become one of Starmer's most costly missteps to date. Sir Keir Starmer's proposed EU agreement, initially praised as a reset of UK relations, is already encountering significant political and economic turbulence. Central to the controversy is a new plan to link the UK's emissions trading scheme UKETS with the European Union's carbon trading system, a move his government touts as progressive climate cooperation. However, fresh analysis suggests the deal could end up costing UK energy customers an additional £200 million per year in electricity bills. The timing could hardly be worse. British households are already buckling under the strain of record-high inflation, soaring food costs, and rising taxes. The additional burden of increased energy prices has the potential to ignite a broader public backlash. The EU and UK carbon markets were designed to place a financial cost on carbon emissions, encouraging companies to reduce pollution by making it more expensive to emit CO. In theory, this structure supports global emissions reductions. But crucial differences between the two systems are where problems begin. The EU's carbon prices are significantly higher than those of the UK, primarily due to differences in supply and demand of carbon allowances in differing industrial structures. The UK, through deindustrialization and a surplus of emissions allowances, has maintained lower carbon prices. By linking the two systems, the UK will lose its relative advantage. Prices in Britain are likely to rise as the market aligns with the more expensive EU system. Energy consultant Catherine Porter, an independent analyst with no political affiliation, has issued a stark warning. She estimates the deal could add over £200 million per year to household electricity bills. According to Porter, the UK's current system benefits from a surplus of carbon allowances, a cushion that Starmer's deal would effectively eliminate. The result is a likely increase in compliance costs for energy producers, which would be passed down to consumers. There are no obvious benefits to UK consumers, Porter stated. This so-called level playing field just means Britain is surrendering its competitive advantage to meet Brussels' regulatory expectations. And it's working people who will foot the bill. The implications extend far beyond energy prices. The decision to align with the EU's carbon market is widely interpreted as a political signal. Starmer is perceived as showing a willingness to reverse post-Brexit separation and begin reintegrating aspects of British regulation with European frameworks. This move also sends a message to British industries: prepare for tighter rules, higher operational costs, and reduced domestic flexibility. The current government's defense of the decision hinges on avoiding future tariffs, specifically the EU's incoming Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism (CBAM). This new tariff will penalize imports from countries that don't meet the EU's climate regulations, effectively taxing goods produced under less strict carbon regimes, according to government officials. aligning the UK's carbon policy with. The EU's will shield British businesses from the CBAM, allowing them to maintain competitiveness in European markets. A report commissioned by energy companies, conducted by Frontier Economics, suggests that aligning with the EU system could save British businesses approximately £770 million over 4 years by mitigating these potential tariffs. However, critics argue that the savings are overstated. The same deal, according to Catherine Porter and other analysts, is projected to cost £200 million per year in electricity bills amounting to £800 million over 4 years. In essence, the deal could nullify its own benefits, making the entire maneuver economically futile. So far, public outrage has been slow to ignite, but political analysts predict that the issue could become a flashpoint, especially if the economic pain becomes evident in household bills. The opposition will likely seize on this as a sign that Starmer's leadership prioritizes international image and political alignment over domestic affordability and independence, adding to the chorus of concern. Andy Mayer from the Institute of Economic Affairs argued that the UK missed an opportunity to use lower carbon costs as a strategic economic advantage. Slashing our carbon costs could have helped attract investment in both traditional and low-carbon industries, Mayer said. Instead, we're voluntarily locking ourselves into a system that's more expensive, more rigid, and less responsive to British needs. Mayer and others believe Starmer had a chance to design a uniquely British carbon policy, one that served both environmental goals and economic pragmatism. Instead, they argue, the Labour leader has chosen a path of regulatory realignment with Brussels, with few tangible benefits for the average consumer, while political backlash grows at home. Another story highlighting British behavior abroad also took center stage. An EasyJet flight from London to Ibiza ended in controversy after a Spanish traveler, Erica Beresina, described the flight as a horror experience. Beresina posted a video on Instagram detailing how the flight, which lasted 2.5 hours, was marred by unruly behavior from allegedly drunk British tourists. According to her account, the passengers were shouting, singing loudly, and consuming alcohol during the flight. Beresina described the travelers as animals and called for airlines to restrict boarding for individuals clearly under the influence of alcohol or drugs. She claimed that some passengers were drunk, high, and taking pills even before boarding the plane. This can't be allowed, she wrote. These people should not be allowed to board a plane or buy alcohol on board. The disruption reportedly left other passengers, especially women, visibly frightened. The atmosphere on the flight became so chaotic that flight attendants were unable to perform their duties properly, raising concerns about onboard safety and discipline. Airlines emphasize that their staff are not just service workers, but trained professionals in emergency procedures and passenger safety. Beresina's post quickly went viral and drew attention to growing concerns over party tourism in Spain. The island of Ibiza, a well-known party destination, is once again in the spotlight as local communities push back against the impact of excessive tourism. Her complaint aligns with broader unrest throughout Spanish tourist destinations. Just this past weekend, over 130,000 people marched through the Canary Islands in a mass anti-tourism protest. Demonstrators demanded fewer short-term tourist rentals and more affordable housing for local residents. The protests reflect increasing frustration over the strain mass tourism places on local infrastructure, housing, and community life. Barcelona has seen similar protests, with citizens expressing growing discomfort with the volume of short-term rentals and the rising cost of living. Many argue that tourism-driven development is hollowing out traditional neighborhoods and pricing locals out of their own cities. The incident on the EasyJet flight serves as a microcosm of these larger tensions. As British tourists flock to Mediterranean Destinations, they bring with them a culture of party tourism that is increasingly unwelcome among local populations. For Spain, balancing the economic benefits of tourism with the social and environmental costs has become a pressing national issue. As for EasyJet, the airline has yet to release an official statement on the incident. However, the mounting pressure may prompt carriers to reconsider their policies regarding alcohol sales and passenger behavior on flights to party destinations. Back in the UK, the political cost of Starmer's carbon alignment deal may also begin to rise. The combination of increased living costs, perceptions of weakened sovereignty, and regulatory convergence with the EU is likely to ignite debate in the coming weeks. For now, the Labour leader's morning has been anything but smooth. A carefully negotiated agreement once hailed as visionary is now under heavy scrutiny. Critics warn that the policy may come to symbolize the very tension Starmer had hoped to transcend, the competing demands of global diplomacy and domestic responsibility. In politics, symbolism matters. And today, both in Westminster and at 35,000 feet above the Mediterranean, the symbols point to an uncomfortable truth. The price of international cooperation, when poorly calculated, is often paid by the very public leaders claimed to serve. The political implications of Starmer's alignment run deeper than economic forecasting. As the Labour leader seeks to position himself as a stable, pro-European alternative to a fractured Conservative Party, this deal is emblematic of a broader ideological shift, one that could reshape Labour's identity in the post-Brexit era. However, critics warn that such moves risk alienating key voter bases, particularly in working-class regions that back Brexit in hopes of greater national independence and economic relief. To them, this deal may appear as a backdoor route to EU reintegration, cloaked in the language of climate cooperation. It's a sensitive balancing act. Starmer must reconcile Labour's modern internationalist vision with the L. In that sense, the row at PMKS wasn't just an argument about EU technicalities. It was a snapshot of Britain's
Today, the OBR has recognised the
country
benefits
caught
of
between
our
its
plan
past
to
decision
get Britain
to
building.
leave the EU and the practical realities of needing to work with it. The tension between sovereignty and stability, between symbolism and substance, continues to define this new phase of British politics. As Parliament adjourned and the news cycle moved into evening broadcasts, it was clear that Starmer had succeeded in pushing through a major diplomatic agreement. But whether he has convinced the public that it was worth it, or that it was done on their terms, remains to be seen. Outside Westminster, the political temperature mirrored the heated Commons exchanges. Grassroots organizations, including Leave backing campaign groups, began mobilizing once again. Groups such as Stand Up for Sovereignty and We Are the 17.4 Million issued statements condemning what they called the most serious political backsliding since the Brexit vote. They accused the government of treating the public's decision in the 2016 referendum as a temporary inconvenience rather than a binding democratic mandate. Public opinion, as measured in overnight snap polls, began to polarize. Supporters of Labour praised the move as an overdue reset of UK-EU relations, highlighting the prospect of smoother travel, fewer barriers for food exporters, and renewed scientific collaboration through programs like Horizon. Critics, however, focused on sovereignty, questioning why a government with a strong parliamentary majority would voluntarily agree to adopt EU standards in agriculture and energy to sectors often used as benchmarks for independence post-Brexit. The issue of payments to the EU remained especially contentious. While Prime Minister Starmer downplayed their size and described them as administrative contributions, Badenick and others insisted the British public had a right to know exactly how much taxpayer money was being committed and to what ends. This is not pocket change, she argued. It's a question of whether we are once again paying into a system we no longer belong to. The Prime Minister's team, by contrast, maintained that these payments were targeted and limited to specific collaborative programs in Britain's national interest. One aide likened it to paying a gym membership to use the equipment, not to run the whole gym. Still, the lack of upfront detail in the Commons gave critics ammunition. Badenoch and several others have formally requested a Treasury breakdown of the financial implications of the agreement, details that could form the basis of further scrutiny in the weeks ahead. Beyond the halls of Westminster, business leaders were already adjusting to the new rules. In interviews aired on national television, representatives from major supermarket chains welcomed the SPS deal, arguing that it would lower supply chain costs, reduce delays at ports, and limit the amount of food waste caused by regulatory duplication. Importers and exporters of meat, dairy, and fresh produce were particularly optimistic, citing millions saved in compliance costs. But in smaller towns and fishing communities, reactions were far more negative. Fishermen from Cornwall to the Scottish coast spoke to reporters, describing the new arrangements as a sellout and an act of betrayal. One industry representative told the BBC that the government has locked us into a 15-year arrangement with less flexibility than we had before Brexit. That's not progress. That's regression. The row also attracted international attention. European outlets portrayed the agreement as a sign of thawing relations after years of frosty dialogue. Several EU leaders praised the deal, noting it reflected mutual pragmatism and respect. But some continental analysts suggested the UK's return to deeper cooperation, especially in the areas of regulation and youth mobility, could be a stepping stone to even broader alignment in the future, whether that's a vision or a fear. Depends on who you ask. In Brussels, sources said the EU was open to further talks, but would insist on maintaining the balance of the current arrangement, access in exchange for alignment. Any hint of the UK trying to cherry-pick future terms without adopting the associated standards would likely be rejected. Back in the UK, political strategists began gaming out the long-term effects. For Labour, the goal is to demonstrate competency and international credibility to show voters, businesses, and global partners that Britain is no longer a pariah, but a serious player on the world stage. That means deals, however small or technical, that rebuild trust and ease friction. For Conservatives, the strategy is more complex. While some see opportunities to moderate the party's tone and reclaim lost voters in the center, others believe that doubling down on Brexit purity is the only way to energize the base and survive the next general election. Badenoch's performance at PMCAS has already been privately praised by a growing faction of MPs who see her as a standard bearer for a future Conservative revival. Meanwhile, internal tensions in both major parties could grow. Within Labour, MPs from traditional Leave areas will be watching carefully how their constituents react. In the Conservative camp, any whiff of leadership maneuvering could reopen divisions that have festered since the Johnson and Truss eras. The fundamental question, what is Brexit now, remains unresolved. Is it about economic independence or just the absence of formal EU membership? Is sovereignty absolute or a negotiation between principles and practical benefits? For now, Starmer is betting that pragmatism will win out, that voters have moved beyond slogans and want results. But as this week's PMCAS made clear, the political risks of that approach are real.